Well, welcome to the most recent episode of the Akkad and Coco Report. Today we have Dr. Venkatesh from Bangalore here. Dr. Venkatesh is a interventional cardiologist who is in private practice in Bangalore right now. He went to he did his training at PGI Chandigarh, where he did his cardiology training as well. Finished in 2001. He was an assistant professor for some time after that, and then saw the light and went into private practice. He's now director of cardiology at Aster Hospital in Bangalore. So welcome, Dr. Venkatesh. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Anish. Thank you, Michelle.
We have you on to talk about the reservation system in India. For those listeners that may be unaware, India, like the United States, has been grappling with different groups of people within the societies that, from an outcome standpoint, have done very, very differently historically. So you have groups of, in the United States, the common, of course, what we see all the time is that there's this distinction between whites, Asian Americans, blacks, and Hispanics. And a lot is written. There's a lot of rioting. There's a lot of protests that take place because the outcomes between those groups aren't what some would hope to be. And the same thing applies in India. And this was actually something that was thought of a lot by the folks who were involved in writing the Constitution of India. And so I thought it'd be really interesting to see for our audience, how India has been trying to manage and deal with this. And one of the systems that they've come up with is what's commonly known in India as the reservation system. So without much else, because Dr. Venkatesh is, knows a lot more about this than I do, can you tell us a little bit, Dr. Venkatesh, about the reservation system and how it came about, and then we'll go into your training and how it may have impacted you.
Well, reservation, as you rightly pointed out, is some kind of a system where we try to bring up to speed people who have been not doing so well because of historical reasons. So historically, if you look at India's own track record on this, the whole process of trying to do something to uplift the backward classes have started even before independence, even in the early 20th century. Some of the kings did try to have scholarships for good students who belonged to the depressed classes at that time. They even made some reservations in the courts. So some history is there in the 1900s. Later, the British, before independence, tried to bring up some systems where they identified the depressed classes and then try to get them some political, some educational reservations. That is, they try to give them some importance in how they can get ahead in the system. I think it was both a political move as well as there must have been some really altruistic motives behind that. So that part is never clear. Even the people who wrote the Constitution, whether there was some kind of political expediency or there was a genuine interest in bringing up in every one of them who are involved is always a question. But it looks like that there was a section of people who are in power, whether it is British or the kings before them or the ones who made the Constitution, they were genuinely interested in helping the depressed classes. So that was the term used by the British initially till about 1935. That is when the terms, the scheduled classes, scheduled caste and scheduled tribe were coined. Basically, the British came up with lists or schedules where they identified some castes. For that, we should know, of course, what the caste system was then. But then these castes, they drew up and said that these are depressed classes. They are socially discriminated against. and they disadvantaged. Therefore, these people should be given political space in terms of reserved electorates or reserved seats, and then they also should be given jobs, because education, economic improvement will bring them up socially. So this was what happened in the before the independence.
What
Then
was the basis for so you describe, I think currently in India it's the scheduled caste, the scheduled tribes, and then there's this other potpourri of other backward classes. What's the genesis of that in India? In the United States, of course, slavery is regarded as the genesis of why it is that blacks in America, aren't represented in a way that we want. What is that in India?
so this goes back to the genesis of the caste system itself. There's a lot of debate about how exactly this came about, what exactly was the genesis. But then I think most people talk about the varnas. Varna in Sanskrit means color or different kinds of people. So from the time the Hindu society was divided into four varnas, based according to some on the kind of work they did. The scholars and the priests were the Brahmins, the ruling class, the kings and the warriors were in the Kshatriya varna. Then the traders were called as the Vaishyas, and then the peasants and the other workers, the artisans, etc., the potters and all that. So they were said to be the Shudras. So these four varnas have been accepted as that they were there from quite a long time. At some point of time, we have this class of people who didn't belong to any of these varnas. So they are called as asavarniyas. That is, they don't belong to any of these four varnas, and they were considered as untouchables. Generally, they would not be allowed into the mainstream. For example, if there is a village or a township, they would live in a kind of a slums outside. They won't be allowed to come into the town unless there is something like a carcass to be thrown away or a sewage to be cleaned or something like that. And they wouldn't be allowed to use the public water bodies like wells and tanks and that kind of a thing. So they were really kept out. Now, when did this happen? It's not very clear going by history, but certainly from the time of Mughals and after that, these particular class of people were noted. And I think historically it's been recorded that definitely they were there. So whether they came from the same four varnas where some of the Shudras, that is the peasants and artisans, were deprived of their belongings and property, became lower than the lowest class in the four varnas, or they were there all along but were not recorded in history, is not very, very clear. But the varna system seems to be the genesis of this scheduled castes. The scheduled tribes are a different kind of entity. These are basically the tribals who lived in forests. They would not come into the towns and get into into the realm of normal administration of kings and all that. But I think when the British took over the forests and exploited the forests for their own economy, these people got displaced, and they are the ones who are typically we call them as scheduled tribes. That's how the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes came into existence.
So the this is, there's been historical oppression. That's not in debate, correct? That there's been historical oppression of these backward castes, and that has a lot to do with why, for instance, if you look at the professional class or you look at positions in government or other sought after positions, correct? There is a minority of folks that are from the backward castes that are in those positions, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, the oppression, the discrimination exists even today. I think that is something which we cannot run away. Even today, it's slightly better in the towns and cities because urbanization, as Dr. Ambedkar, one of the Dalit leaders of that time, who was one of the important members of the who wrote the constitution technically. So, as he said, the urbanization will reduce the discrimination, which I think to a small extent has happened. But then, if you go even now to villages, smaller towns, that discrimination exists. I think the integration of various castes, the formation of what we call as a casteless society, is quite a distant dream. That discrimination exists. And also, we are talking about thousands of years of oppression. These people have been kept away from the society, mainstream education, or jobs for ages. So for them to catch up in these 6 or 7 decades is not been a very easy job as well. So even today, there is underrepresentation of the Dalit class. So I'm using this word Dalit, though the government has said that we should not use this word. Dalit was coined by Dr. Ambedkar to talk about the scheduled castes. So when we talk about reservation, the important thing is that scheduled castes and scheduled tribes fall under that traditionally, historically depressed, discriminated class, which I think undoubtedly requires reservation. Now, when we talk about backward castes or the other backward community, the other backward caste, OBCs, what is called. So that is a little bit of a contentious issue. The way the whole OBC layer has been formed, and how amongst them is everybody were everybody discriminated historically, were everybody deprived of opportunities, is always a matter of contention. There is a lot of controversy on that. But as far as scheduled castes and scheduled tribes are concerned, I think there's absolutely no doubt about that they were discriminated against, and it's going to take a lot of time for them to integrate into the society and also achieve socially and economically what they rightly deserve.
The history of this is so fascinating. You've brought up now, you've mentioned him multiple times, so we should probably talk about him just a little bit because he's so important to this, right? Is B.R. Ambedkar. So the interesting story of Ambedkar, as I read it, growing up, was that he was born into a backward caste. He was born as what's otherwise has been referred to as an untouchable, a Dalit, right? And he came from a very poor family. His family worked actually for the East India Company, and as I recall, one of the paths that he had to kind of come out of this, he became an incredibly learned, one of India's great intellectuals, of course. He went to London to study. I think he got an economics degree or something as well, and then came back to India, and then was one of the biggest spokespersons for the Dalits, because he remembered vividly the discrimination that he had growing up. But interestingly, the discrimination that he had growing up was primarily from, was largely from Indian society, correct? Would it be fair to say that it was if the British were not in India, how would B.R. Ambedkar have done? Is that
actually Ambedkar, Dr. Ambedkar was born into this Mahar community. He was recognized by the Maharaja of Baroda.
Ah, okay.
Be a brilliant guy.
Okay.
And then he was sponsored for education in London and then in the United States, and he did a law degree. Right. And he came back. So one couldn't say, because if English education was not there,
right,
I think
Yeah. No,
may
that's a great
consider
point. This is
what
why
he
this is
could
why
have
you're
done.
here. Yeah.
But the thing is, there were kings at the time, as I mentioned, Maharaja
Yeah.
of Baroda was one, and then there was the king of Travancore, and these
Yeah.
are people who saw that, and Sahu Maharaj from Maharashtra. So these people saw that there is oppression of poorer classes, and there is need to build a casteless society, and they needed to encourage people from the so-called lower strata of the society. I think that was seen. But then again, when the British came in, what exactly was the motivation for them to look at a society which has so much oppression of one part of that community? Why did they try to bring it out? What was the role of, for example, proselytization at the time? Because obviously the underprivileged is an easy target for proselytization. Whether that was done with humanity in mind, or simply propagation of a religion in mind, or they actually felt genuinely concerned about the oppression. These are all
Yeah.
things. I think people look at this
Yeah.
as narratives depending on
Right.
where they come from. So I think it's very difficult to say. The people say that British tried to divide the Hindu community into the Dalits and upper castes, and try to divide them so that it was easy to put forth their divide and rule policy.
Yeah.
But then it's possible that they were genuinely astonished about this kind of societal division, and some of the British may be genuinely interested in bringing up these people. So one couldn't
Right.
say. And then I think it's always about what you believe, and if you don't like the British, you would probably say that it's for their own interest that they did it. But yes,
Right.
maybe if British hadn't come, maybe things would have been a little different.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. Of course, it's not that the British were the ones that started this type, the reservation system, or kind of trying to uplift the backward caste. It was Maharajas, multiple of whom that you mentioned, also recognized the kind of unfairness in society and were trying to help as well. And again, the history of this is so fascinating. So we'll just a brief little aside, and we'll get into get into some what you've kind of witnessed as you've kind of been through training and in medicine and stuff. But isn't it the case that when the British there was a division between Ambedkar and Mahatma Gandhi, correct? When the British proposed a rule that basically attempted to give to reserve certain spots in the electorate in the university positions and base that proportionally in some proportional population proportional way. And I think it was and that actually Gandhi was very upset about this, and it created some divisions between Gandhi and Ambedkar. I think that was one of Gandhi's many fasts that he did against some social position or the other. But it's interesting to see how how this is played out, and how whether or not, whatever the motive for the British was, whether it was to sow division, which is what many Hindus thought at the time, it was to sow division within larger Indian society, or whether it was some actual good intent. This has been a political kind of hot potato, and it's reasonable to say that none of these efforts have necessarily resulted in society kind of knitting together more. You had the British proposing this affirmative action reservation scheme. That seems fair and whatnot, but that created massive. Two of our leading intellectuals at the time, Mahatma Gandhi and Ambedkar, were basically were split over that and created division.
That's mainly for the political representation. So
Right.
the main difference of opinion between these two were in the a number of seats in the legislature, in the central legislature, or in the provincial governments. How many legislators should come from where, and also how do they come get elected? there was a proposal to have separate electorates. That was what the British proposed, which Dr. Ambedkar was very interested in taking, because wherever he thought that in those regions where the depressed classes were in majority, that they should have the electorate, they should have a special vote to choose their own representatives, and where they were not, they should still be able to vote into the general elections. But Mahatma Gandhi was against that. And to me, it looks like, and I think there are a lot of people who believe that it looks like he was trying to keep the Hindu, society together. He didn't want a division there, because I think the Congress was also trying to balance the fact that Muslim League was at the opposite side, and they wanted a political, one-upmanship, where it was in their interest to keep the Hindu electorate or the Hindu society together. And I think that is where Gandhi was against Ambedkar's idea of a separate electorate. So though finally, when all these negotiations happened, they came up with this Pune Pact, which said that the depressed classes will have number of reserved seats. That was also very funny because, one of the, this thing at the time, World War II was going on. India, the Congress went into this Quit India movement. Ambedkar himself, who was with the British, this thing about the war efforts, he was pro-British in the war. So he actively involved himself, and he was even on some kind of commission council which the Viceroy created, and he was able to get a lot of political gains for his community at the time. So I think in this whole tussle between Gandhi and Ambedkar, Ambedkar played it out very well and secured a lot of gains for his community. But then again, I think his brilliance, as you mentioned, was recognized, like by people like Nehru. When the government was formed, he made him the law minister. At the time, even though then upper caste would have been natural choices for many posts, and I think Nehru, they say, was a great egalitarian aspirant. But at the same time, he chose Dr. Ambedkar to be the one of the main guys who wrote the Constitution of India. So that again says that in spite of the fact that there was a majority of upper caste people in the Constituent Assembly, this representation given and opportunity to put in all the clauses for the depressed classes says a lot about India's intention, the constitutional intention, that there should be a society without class later on. So I think the intent was there.
Dr. Venkatesh, before we move on, one further clarification. This division, into classes or caste is present throughout the regions of India, whether is that correct? Whether it's in the north or the south, or in a part of the country that speaks this language versus that language, they all have at some level this division.
Yes, it is. It is there in all parts of the four varnas are there in all the parts.
Okay, and therefore the varnas are not dependent on any specific, because I mean there will be ethnic differences between different regions of India, so it's not really an ethnic or per se. I mean, if you wanted to say traceable to particular initial or ancestral tribes or group that might be distinguishable either on physical characteristics or anything like that.
Oh well, that's a very interesting question. Physical characteristics. Anyway, let me clarify. For example, if you look at the region of Kashmir, Kashmir.
Yes, in the north, yeah.
So there, you traditionally had only two kinds of people: the Kashmiri Hindus and Kashmiri Muslims. And all the Kashmiri Hindus considered themselves as Brahmins and Pandits. So that Hindu community there was possibly a classless society, the Hindu community in Kashmir. It's possible that because the a lot of jobs that, like the farmers and the artisans, all belong to the Muslim community. So that is why probably you don't have the different classes. The Kashmiri Pandits only into administration and teaching and priests and all that. Other than that, in the rest of the country, the four divisions are seen, and the so-called Dalits are also seen everywhere. Only based on the region, the representation of different the different four classes may be different. For example, some areas may have a lot of tribals. Some areas may have a lot of people who are non-Brahmin upper caste. That kind of a thing can happen. But overall, as you said, it's common to the entire Hindu society in India.
Okay.
So Michelle, what I'm curious what your thoughts are. Here you have a large, massive country coming into being. Gaining independence from the British. You have a very stratified society because of a history of casteism, and you kind of have discrimination almost impregnated within society. And so you had in that constitution, in the writing of the constitution, it became kind of it wasn't really questioned, the idea that there would be a reservation system. There would be a system where you reserve, in order to uplift certain members of society that have been historically depressed, you have a quota. You would reserve things. And again, this is something, a quota, according to the United States, in terms of its law, over and over again is said a racial quota is wrong. And we can get in, we've talked about that multiple times. But this is actually embedded within the Indian Constitution, that you must have, you need to have a reservation system. You need to have a quota. Your thoughts, Michelle, in terms of what was that reasonable given where they started in 1947, or was this kind of would you have done it differently, or how would you have?
Well, it's it's difficult to. I mean, in a way, you want this question of egalitarianism. As you mentioned, it's interesting that you said that it was an aspiration of the kings even before British rule, and you kind of wonder why
some of the
kings why did it emerge at some point, and those are very. I mean, it's such a deeply rooted problem, and it's a very messy history. I mean, as you made it very clear, Dr. Venkatesh, how it's difficult. How did it come about? Over the centuries, you can't even trace the origin of these discriminations. What were they based on? Was there even at a time a possibly reasonably just division, meaning division according to different trades? And there's not necessarily a great injustice to have a class of priests and intellectuals, a class of artisans and whatnot, just because in human history, trades and whatnot are passed on from generation to generation, from father to son, and so forth. So you would see natural divisions without necessarily an intent of creating problems. And then in modern times, there's probably there's been a wind of egalitarianism that has sort of spread across the world in different ways, and there's the idea that it would be a better society if it were more egalitarian, if there was less discrimination on what seems to be, at least currently, arbitrary bases, since individually we now recognize that most individuals, we're all human beings. We should have the same competencies and the same chance at making it in society. And how do you go from the old system to the new system is unbelievably tricky. So I don't know what it seems reasonable to use the law to sort of equalize the playing field. On the other hand, I'm sure that it meets with the resistance of the realities on the ground, and so I'm sure. You will tell us that how it's backfired in many ways, like we've seen it backfire here. Could it have been predicted at the time or not? I mean, that's sort of hindsight commentariat. I mean, I'm not
wanted
quite
to,
sure. Yeah.
I wanted to, so Dr. Michel is doing a great job kind of winding his way through what is a very difficult problem that they faced in 1947. So, but obviously it's a worthy aspiration, the great goal. How did this seep into medicine? Because obviously, becoming a doctor is a fairly elite occupation almost everywhere in the world. I imagine, was this off the bat? Medical schools, there are government medical schools, there are private medical schools. For those who don't know, the public medical schools are usually reasonably high quality and are very, very, very cheap. And that, I guess, ostensibly early on was one of the major ways you would get a medical education, correct? Has the reservation system been part of medical education for, ever since the inception of India?
Yes. What happened was once these were constitutionally promised, I mean, almost like a fundamental right, though it was not fundamental right for the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes. Right away, right off the bat, as you said, reserved seats in the legislature, reserved seats in educational institutions, and for jobs and promotions was there right from 1950. That is when the constitution was adopted and India became a republic. From that time onwards, it was there. So there was a short period in time when this was challenged, and for a year or two, there were no reservations because there was some conflict within the constitution, but the Supreme Court then resolved that the constitutional amendments resolves that. So from 51 onwards, the reservations have been there in all educational institutions as well. So at the time, the question of private medical colleges don't arise because back then all the medical colleges were run by the government itself. So the educational institutions have had reservations right from the beginning. But then all of this applies to state-funded or state-aided educational institutions. Till recently, the reservation system did not apply to private institutions. Now here in medicine it becomes very tricky because even if there is a private medical college, a certain number of seats in that medical college has to be given to the All India quota. That is, the selection happens on an All India level, and on that reservations will happen. In schools, the story is different. For primary education, India has passed a law called Right to Education. That is, everybody, all children have to have primary education. So even those who cannot afford have to be given, primary education. But the government doesn't have the infrastructure to provide education to all the children who go for primary education. Therefore, 25% of all seats, even from private schools, the primary schools, have to be reserved for the underprivileged. So there, that part is taken care. But the reservations in medicine per se has been there right from the beginning. The only place where there is no reservation as yet in medicine is what we call as super specialty, what you call as subspecialty. For example, when we get into medicine, the degree here is MBBS, and automatically everybody who has MBBS doesn't want to become an MD. So there is a stage between the MBBS and the MD. There is an exam, a qualifying exam. There again, there is a reservation. Seats are, quotas are kept for SC, STs and now OBCs. But from after MD, if you want to do a fellowship, we call it as DM or DNB or MCH here. The fellowships, subspecialty fellowships like cardiology, neurology, there is no reservation as yet. Right now, as we speak, in two states in South India, that is in Kerala and Tamil Nadu, there is a move to introduce super specialty reservations as well, but that is not fructified yet. So the reservations have been there in all of medicine right from the beginning.
So, can you clarify before? Sorry, just before 1947, or before there was this intention to rectify the disparities. Were there any? And it may be hard to tell because the educational system was different, and there were a lot of different things. But were there discriminatory laws? I mean, essentially, was the state or the different states in the different parts of the country just actively preventing the underprivileged or certain groups from having access, or was it just a cultural thing that the underprivileged did not have access just because they were not spontaneously, society sort of neglected them? And
there was discrimination. I do not know in the, let's say, 20th century before independence, whether an underprivileged boy or a girl wanted to actually join medicine, whether that would have been possible. But if you go back into previous history, a little more back, the Dalits or the lower castes were actively discouraged from studying, even primary education for that matter. So that was the kind of discrimination which was there. I guess after the primary education and all this, the British started schools, and even some of the Indian kings who were technically working with the British, they also started separate schools for the underprivileged. There were laws which were that certain number of seats should be given to the children belong to the underprivileged class, etc. All that was there, though not all of that was strictly enforced, but there was a move to get them into the mainstream. So, but then the discrimination would be in a very different way. I think if the whole system is made of upper class, so there would be obviously discrimination into selections, into promotions, and those kind of things must have been there. So that I think is undeniably there. But as there was no written thing that you can't do it. In fact, I think 20th century people wanted them to get out into the mainstream education.
So when it started, and just to review, just so I'm clear, there's a reservation system, certainly in the public system, in the government-funded system. You're saying there's also, for medicine, there's also a certain number of seats in private medical colleges that also have to be reserved for backward castes?
No, all of these reservations apply to state-owned, state-funded, or state-aided educational institutions, and also the job reservations are only for public employment. The private companies cannot, don't have to necessarily do this. But the reservations, the quota, the percentage of seats were all fixed for the government colleges.
I see. Okay. So then so when it started, the government medical colleges was the only real way that you could.
There were no private medical colleges.
There were no private medical colleges. So what was the percentage of seats that were reserved, early on? And you can describe how that's changed, by the time you got to, training.
See, these percentages are fixed, basically depending on the percentage of the particular communities, that scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in the population at the time of those census. The scheduled castes still get 15% of seats, and the scheduled tribes 7.5% seats. So 22.5% of seats are reserved for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes from the time it started till now. The addition has been the OBCs, the other backward castes. So that was not there when the reservation system started. You might have heard of the Mandel Commission. This is the second backward community commission, which was formed to look at that there were non-SC/ST communities within the Hindu society, which were also oppressed. That was the claim. especially the particular section called as the Shudras. So there were castes within that, subcastes within that class, where there were lesser social and educational opportunities. So that was being claimed, and there was always a demand for reservation for them as well. So in the late 80s, a third reservation category called as OBCs came in. I think from that is when onwards all the problems started. I think if you look at the entire history of reservation of India, I don't think anybody grudges, even the most rabid anti-reservation activist would say that the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes are getting something which is which they don't deserve. Thousands of years of oppression, they have been somewhere, even today they are discriminated against. I think that they should get the reservation even now, I think is a given. There are two controversial points about that. One is, how long are you going to give that? So I think that has been answered because the representation has not been great even after so many years of reservation, 7 decades of reservation. The representation in all fields has not been good, so it has to continue. But a bigger criticism about reservation for scheduled caste and scheduled tribe is that almost 90% of the people belonging to scheduled caste and scheduled tribe classes never enjoy the benefit of reservation, because it's that 10%, less than 10% of that particular class which enjoys. So generations after generations of the same scheduled caste and scheduled tribes who got the reservations, who got into positions of privilege, who kind of became better socially and educationally, economically, their children continue to get the reservation. So therefore, it's still not percolated to the all straight off their own society. So that is the criticism against reservations in scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. The bigger controversy is the entire anti-reservation movement has been triggered off because of the bringing in of the third category of reservations called as OBCs. So that is a major problem in this thing, as which Dr. Akkad was saying, that what would be the backlash is all after the late 80s. This has happened.
So what is the go ahead, Michelle, sorry.
Yeah, no, so if, as we said earlier, this division caste system is widespread and not necessarily visible by any physical characteristics or whatnot, how is it maintained? Primarily by memory or by knowledge of where somebody comes from and their sort of genealogy, if you will? I mean, what keeps somebody from moving? Is there any movement? Does anybody ever leave the underclass?
No, there is what is it? We marry into the same communities,
right?
It's a very, very close system.
Correct, but it's interesting that it is. I mean, that's what I imagine your answer would be, but there's nothing apart from culture and cultural habits, and because marriage is it's a cultural institution, that sort of thing. There's nothing that otherwise would keep an individual from changing castes, right?
A sense of hierarchy keeps it, because some of these the classes, for example, the Brahmins are considered. I'm a Brahmin though.
Right.
The Brahmins are considered to be a superior, and the Shudras are considered to be inferior. There seems to be some kind of a hierarchical notion about this, even though, as you said, that it could have started off with different professions, and that's what Shri Krishna, Lord Shri Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, that this is all based on the karma, that is the kind of work which you do. But then over years, I think this hierarchical system has kind of evolved, and therefore it is looked down upon that a person from a higher caste would marry somebody from a lower caste, and that kind of a thing. So that perpetuates the
Right, the system, but so does the reservation system in a way, because the reservation system recognizes those distinctions, and by recognizing them and attributing sort of a status to each one of them, implicitly perpetuates them. And the only way that it's not a system that by itself will lead to a classless society. I mean, it will maintain the classes, and it's trying to make the classes more equal in their outcomes or whatnot, but the classes will, are perpetuated in a way. Am I correct there?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest, criticisms against this reservation system. Right from the time of the Constituent Assembly debates, the debates which happened when the Constitution was written, people like Nehru they were very much against this reservation, because they knew that the reservations will perpetuate the caste system. There is a sense of discrimination felt by the upper caste, because they feel that somebody who deserves a spot in a medical college is not getting it because somebody who's got a reservation is getting it. So there is a lot of animosity there, and there is also a sense of oppression and victimhood by people from the other class, and there's always a sense of suspicion. So reservation, it was thought maybe that social, climbing up, economical, emancipation will lead to a classless society. But I don't think that's going to happen, or it has happened. As you rightly pointed out, now it is all about, I need to get into a service or a medical college. So this is my caste. So people are wearing their caste on their labels. They're wearing their labels. I think is a problem with reservations.
So how hard is it? So first the OPC, this is the next caste. What percentage now are reserved for, scheduled tribe, scheduled caste, OPC?
So the Mandel Commission saw that, estimated that 52% of Indian population belongs to the backward classes, other than the SC/STs. So they said 27% of seats should be reserved. So, both in education as well as in employment, public employment should be reserved. So this became a 49.5% reservation. And then there was a celebrated case where the Supreme Court said, because some of the states wanted to give more reservation to, some other castes. Truly now it is not an egalitarian intent anymore. It is always all these new classes, new castes being added into reservation is always around the time of election. So this has become an election gimmick. There is no doubt about it. I don't think anybody cares for the upliftment of these people. But then the Supreme Court of India said that 50% should be the cutoff. Beyond that, you cannot reserve. The remaining 50% should be kept for open merit. But then 2 years back, India has had one more constitutional amendment whereby they said the economically weaker sections of the upper castes also can get 10% reservation. So we have now in the central government 60%, and in some states like Rajasthan 75%, Tamil Nadu nearly 70% of the seats are reserved. So that's a huge number. Only a little bit left for the open merit categories.
Wow. So then how has this, how has it impacted? So, I mean, if you're looking at 50 to 60%, so this is by the time, this is of course happening in the last 10 years. So maybe you've not felt, you've felt some of it, but I guess now say an upper caste kid now who wants to try to get into medical school. Can you give us a sense of scale? How hard is it for an upper caste kid to get into medical school now?
Well, in open merit, there are cutoff marks. So let's say the lowest cutoff for the upper caste, unreserved category would probably be the topmost cutoff for the reserved category. So that's how hard it is. So the sense of injustice which the upper caste people will feel there. But it is also more as we move up the pyramid. Like there are a large number of medical seats. So the pain is not felt so much, but the pain is more when from the MBBS, they get into the internal medicine or general surgeries specialties. So that is when it pinches a lot. Yet the super specialties or the subspecialty is not affected by it, but I think that is going to be the biggest problem. So I think this question of people getting into a lot of heartburn from going from MBBS to MD is so much that while kids get into MBBS, they are already looking at what other options. If I don't get into medicine or surgery or ophthalmology here in India, what are the options elsewhere? So I think that parallelly happens.
I see. So give me a sense, just number-wise. So there's some qualifying exam that you take for MBBS before becoming an MD, correct? If for those who want to move on, is there a specific name for a qualifying exam, or?
Yeah, it's called as the NEET exam.
Okay.
National Entrance and Evaluation Test, it is called as. So there are ranks from 1 to 140 or 150,000, and based on the ranks, the selections are done. It's a very complicated system because there are private colleges which also take children based on the ranks.
Yeah.
Government medical colleges. The government medical colleges have state quotas and national quotas. So I think it's a complicated math, but we can say this, that you have to be scoring really high marks to get into medicine seat, MBBS seat, if you are from an upper caste, versus really average or lower than average. Even the qualifying marks are lower for the reserved category. So there is it's difficult to explain, but I think there is a huge difference between the qualifying.
So you have to be in like the top 1% or so of scores to get in if you're an upper caste kid.
Yes. I think because there are 150,000 children writing the exam. So
yeah,
yes,
and whereas you can have an average score and get in if you're a lower caste.
Yeah, even below average score, you could probably. Nobody may. There's a possibility that in some categories, an application is sufficient because there is not enough people who are there giving the exams. In some exams, it happens. In fact, in some jobs and in some educational institutions, seats go a begging because of a particular category. Not enough people who are there to, and there are rules for that. If the seats don't get filled in for 3 consecutive years, it goes into the open category. So that kind of rules are there. So that's also, because it's not that, of course, we always can easily say that it is tougher for the general category people. But at the same time, one of the reasons for that is also that if you look at the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, there is a huge dropout rate in the primary education level. So there are not enough people are coming into that this thing to take up this. So there is not much competition amongst them. I am sure if the government, instead of concentrating on only reservations, built up educational infrastructure for the underprivileged as well as the others, made more medical seats. We need obviously more medical colleges. So if this is all done, I think it is possible that amongst all communities, the competitiveness increases, the level of the tests also would go up amongst them. So at this point of there is a difference.
There's a large difference. Have you? Is it the case that that kids, is this what has created a kind of a stimulus, a boost to the private schools then because of this?
Yes, I mean, one of the things is that if you don't get into through the government seats, you look for private medical colleges. So the market for medical education, private medical college was there regardless of reservation, because India is a very large country and the number of government medical colleges are definitely less. And education is great business in India. So medical colleges and engineering colleges, the professional courses like nursing and pharmacy, they all mushroomed, and that is also helped by this issue.
So they've become very good. Meaning that there's high quality students there. The education is good in the private system. That's kind of developed in part because there was always going to be demand, but of course now with government schools having all these reservation systems, etc., the way to do this is to pay to go to a private school.
Yeah, they do. Though of course, it's not very easy to say that the standard of education in private medical colleges is uniformly good. There are some which are very good and some which are average and some which are below average. So the fact that there is a demand for private education doesn't seem to impact the quality of education that provided, only the number of seats. So that's unfortunately a reality. So.
Do you feel that this system has kind of also created a push for Indian graduates to leave the country?
Well, brain drain is said to be one of the outcomes of reservation system. Now, I think there are people who argue both ways. There are a lot of people who make up their mind right in the beginning that I would want to go abroad and study. So even before they would be affected by, let's say, somebody who's studying in grade 12 already decides that they want to go. So MBBS is just a path for them to then write the USMLE or, and go. So those people have probably already have made up. So whether it's because of reservation they are going out is difficult to say. But beyond MBBS, because the number of seats get lesser, there is a possibility that brain drain may be happening because of that. But I'm not convinced that reservations are the only reason for brain drain. But it may be true in one particular area, that is academics and academic research. In the universities where academics and academic research happens, the introduction of reservation system will frustrate people who are trying to get in from the open category, and they may feel that we are not going to be encouraged or we are not going to get into that. So there is a possibility that people who have a research bent of mind may want to go abroad. But otherwise, a brain drain, I think people who wanted to go had decided that anyway, I suppose.
And so your thoughts, having gone through the process, you have children, correct?
Yeah, I have 2 kids.
Are they interested in medicine?
No.
No. Luckily, no. Is that why is that? Is that partly driven by how difficult it is, or just they never had interest?
Well, I mean, it's too early to say. Maybe they see us, and practicing medicine in India is a little difficult because in private practice it's a 24/7 work, and it's not like in the universities where you have weekend offs and evenings you come home and that kind of a thing. So they see us parents doing the drill all the time. So, but then who knows? In the next few years, they're still very small, so they might want to become that. But then for those who actively look at professional courses in India, this is one of the important points which they think of, that you are from what category. So what are the chances that you might crack, and what is the kind of preparation you have to do? So in that sense, I think it also is a negative, it's a disincentive for studying for certain, classes of people. But they may think that I belong to a particular class, so therefore I don't have to work so hard. May also come out. I am sure that happens.
Did this at any point dissuade you from doing anything?
When I did MBBS and then medicine, the OBC thingy was not there. So the number of seats reserved only was 1/4. It didn't really matter much. But then, there must be some, kids who came, studied with me, who did not qualify because of this. Because if you take away 25% of seats, there must be somebody at that spot whose seat got deprived of. So I think that would have been there. Definitely at all points of time, there would be somebody. You can't have a just society because if you take out some seats for somebody who's underprivileged, then there's somebody from the non-privileged, the privileged section who's going to be deprived of it. So I think that would have been there. But I think it has become now more, because the number of, the percentage of reserved seat is becoming more and more. And I think the frustrations are now on the rise.
So, what are your thoughts on what's going to happen as these frustrations rise? And I guess if the frustrations are mostly among a small elite group of folks, is it just kind of, are they kind of papered over, or is this kind of boiling over in ways that you can see?
See, the thing is that in the job market, reservations don't matter anymore, because if you look at India as a whole, almost 95% of the jobs are not by the government. They're either in the unorganized sector or the private sector. Only about 5-6% of all the jobs are created by the government. So reservations there don't matter. Where they matter is within the departments, in the government jobs, where promotions become an important thing. So there can be individual frustration. So we are talking about a very small number of people. So there is not going to be any problem there. The employees are bound by some service rules. They can't protest, they can't leave. So that is, there is going to be no resistance over there. The main problem will come, as you said, is in the education. And there, the problem is that all of these laws pertaining to reservation, the policies are not really policies. They are constitutional guarantees. Each time, the first constitution straight away had reservations for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. It's in the part 3 of the Constitution, which means it's almost like a fundamental right. So no one can question that. And the next amendments that came in and brought in the other sections also had to go through the constitutional amendments, because anything else, a government policy can be challenged in the court. Therefore, the political parties have made it very clear that they made sure that these things are constitutionally guaranteed. So you can't really fight this. If today there was a law that said you can't have reservations for more than 50%. Now it is 60%, but there's nothing anybody can do. So a small number of, as you said, elite group, which there is a lot of frustration, but really there is no constitutional or judicial remedy for this. And the biggest problem is no political party, even when we speak about BJP today, where it is supposed to represent the interests of upper castes, cannot and is not. It is also very clear. They have also said that we want reservations for the depressed classes. So there is no political will also to remove this. And the question of how long this has to go on. When do you say that all members of a particular society, a particular community have come up to the level of the rest of the society? And when do you say that now the reservation should stop? So I don't think there's going to be a consensus on that. So I think we are sitting on it. I don't think there is going to be status quo. I think the children from upper castes, the unreserved categories, will be lucky if there is not even more reservations. I think that's all I can say. Like, the Tamil Nadu and Kerala government are now talking about bringing in reservations for super specialty. So if that kind of a thing happens, really there is nothing much people can do. The main backlash against reservations happened when the Mandel Commission and the OBC reservations were brought in. There are a lot of people who self-immolated. There was huge protests from the so-called upper caste, people. But then now it is not going to happen, because everybody understands the upper castes are just 25% of the population. It's the remaining 75% of the population which comes into the realm of some reservation or the other. So there is not going to be any change in this. So we are here with reservations.
So it seems like we can just hope for, so you would say that, since 1947, it's been constitutionally mandated. Things are much better in India now than they were in 1947, correct?
Yes, in terms of economic improvement and all that. But then, as I said,
is that because of the reservation system?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Even amongst the, I mentioned this before, even amongst the deserving communities like this scheduled caste, the reservation has only percolated to some 5 or 10% of their own numbers. The remaining members of those communities live in abject poverty and neglect and discrimination. Everything is there. So reservations has actually not achieved anything in terms of economic or social upliftment really. And it has only perpetuated this caste system. So in a way, the idea of reservation when it was brought in was probably a kind of utopian and maybe would have been great, but then it has not delivered anything, is my view.
Say that unfortunately you can never say, well, this policy has, we've tried this policy for 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, therefore this policy has failed, let us try it something else. You can never say that, because the rejoinder, what they'll say back to you always is like, no, it was not done perfectly enough. So the problem was that it was only 22%. And then, once you add the politics into it, this is such a political thing. And that's why I thought it was important to bring up the idea that even when the British...
there is a demand from various sections that there should be an audit of how this was done. Because I think, as you rightly said, probably it was not done right. I don't think it was done with some kind of political ideas in mind, and the way it has only been restricted to some parts of the people, this thing, and generations after generations of a particular community going on, getting the reservations, even when they have become privileged. So these things probably have to be audited. But today, the demand for any kind of audit, whether it is by a political party or a judge or a common person, will be taken as an anti-reservation stand, and immediately, as you said, there will be a lot of backlash. I don't know what's going to happen on Twitter tomorrow. When, if at all, this podcast were to see the light of the day, what all labels will come to who is going to be an issue. So I think probably, as you said, the idea was right, but it was not executed in the right spirit. Maybe that's why we don't see the results which we wanted.
Yeah, I think the idea of egalitarianism is a wonderful one, but I think what is a failure is any attempt by the center or some central bureaucrat to try to fix it. I think anytime you have central bureaucrats try to do big things, right? They do okay building dams. Even that, sometimes they fail. They do okay, building roads. They do okay. And again, all of these are caveats, because of course there's been examples where they failed. They do okay, setting up a protection force, police or the national army or whatnot, right? But once you try, they have this hubris where they think they can balance the scales of society, right? And so you take thousands of years of tradition, of historical oppression, inequality that has kind of developed for a variety of different reasons. And, to think some central bureaucrat, some technocrat who's looking at some Excel sheets or some chart and is going to say, aha, if I make this reservation for this, we will now fix this within 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. That is just so absurd. So I think, the U.S. Supreme Court has said over and over again that, while we may agree that we want a more egalitarian society, you cannot discriminate by color, by race, by whatever, to get to a more equal society. So that's one thing that is clearly a difference between the U.S. Constitution, or how the U.S. Constitution is interpreted, and the Indian Constitution is being interpreted.
I think that's right. Right in the beginning, there was no discrimination. Then they brought in these special provisions. But then, what I feel is that there was no other way, at least for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, to have got the representation they would have wanted in education and employment. But what happened was, I think, the politics. I think over a period of time, all political parties saw reservation as an easy way of getting the vote banks. Instead of that, having kept reservations as a crutch, if they had developed the infrastructure of primary education, giving more opportunities, providing economic support to all of these people, then perhaps the bridge would have been narrowed, the gap would have been narrowed faster, or at least it would have been narrowed at all. That's where I think the system failed, that the intentions, I think, went awry.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, what has happened now. And that's why new castes want to get into the realm of reservation. They want to be termed as backward, and they want to get into reservations too. Everybody wants reservation now. Even the upper caste, because of economic reasons, want to get into, I mean, as if reservations is some kind of a poverty eradication system, which is not true. So I think that's correct. When you try to give reservations, you are naturally discriminating against someone else. So I think that part has to be short, time bound. We should do other stuff in society to improve.
No, as you're saying, there are other things to do. You can, I mean, get electricity to villages, right? Get better teachers to villages. Get that primary infrastructure.
Special schools,
that governments can step in and seem to do reasonably well when there is no private market. In the United States is very different from India, and here, I think I'm much more of the idea that there's almost nothing that the private sphere cannot do, whether it be education or not. India, where you're dealing with these incredibly low resourced villages where you have 25 kids in one mud hut and with no electricity, with a teacher that herself has a fifth grade or fifth class education, that's a whole different level of how do you get that. How do you improve that? And there, the state can come in and try to help and build that infrastructure. But that would have been so that would have been far more useful, I think, than this something that's set up to fail. As you're saying, and it's shown, and that's what has happened. Over 60, 70 years, you've just seen more and more politics, and you were never ever going to be able to keep the politics out of this, right? And they showed that.
Absolutely not.
That's why that story with Ambedkar, the British, and Mahatma Gandhi is important. Is this was always going to be political, and so the best thing to do is to take it out of the politicians' hands. So I have a little glimmer of hope in that in the fact that India is such a massive, vast country that despite all this government stuff, only 5%. They're only responsible for 5% of the economy or whatnot. So here's hoping it stays that way. And just like the private medical college, private education has kind of had a massive boon, right? The Manipal Medical School, I think they own the Granada Medical School, right? so you can, I think that is going to be hopefully the way to kind of, move forward in a way that doesn't kind of tear society apart and result in too much stuff. But
I hope so too. Yeah.
Dr. Venkatesh, I've taken up way too much of your time. Thank you so much. That was super informative. So really, really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Bye-bye.